Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, long overdue, not least of which for the fact that this poor fellow has the dubious pleasure of working on a daily basis alongside me. Sion Kitson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Stuart. It's good to be here.
Right then, so where to start really? Lots to talk about, lots of areas to cover. Guess the place we can probably start is give us your potted history. What started you on your coaching journey, and then what you're doing on a on a daily coaching basis, I suppose, and what occupies your time in the coaching sphere.
Yeah, I listened to the podcast. So I was expecting that you might ask that question. I think where do I start? I guess I go back to where I gained a love and a passion for sport and physical activity, and that was as a child just playing games with my friends. I think for me, I can think of some really interesting examples of playing in the garden in snow, getting my sister to pull me around the garden, falling into a pond that we had in the back of the garden. I can think of backyard cricket, playing into a garage, day-night games with friends that go on for hours and hours, and even football in the garden with the friends. I think that's where it all sort of kicked off, living in a small village, a small community, and a small circle of friends that just wanted to get out and about after school. So that's kind of where it's kicked off, and it's kind of gone from there into competitive team sport. I went to University of Bath. I was fortunate enough to study a sports degree course there, and being just an excellent environment for learning. Wasn't really thinking about coaching at that point. My sport is football, and I spent many years dreaming about being a professional footballer as a teenager. And when that didn't quite happen, had the opportunity to go and continue my studies, and at the time, and still is now, University of Bath was a fantastic place to do that. But being on the football programme there, one of the things that we were asked to do is to give back. So we were a senior team through the university, and there was lots of youth teams around the area. And in particular, I was asked to go and work with a club called Team Bath Arsenal, and two age groups, under 9s and under 13s. Now, that was a bit of a baptism of fire as an 18-year-old, and that was my real first experiences of coaching, I suppose. And it kind of just got me thinking, okay, I'm not going to be a professional footballer anymore, or a top league athlete. And thought, yeah, I really enjoy this. I really enjoy seeing others improve, have enjoyment through the game. Just thought, I want to do a bit more of that. So over the life course of university, started completing my courses through the Football Association, and continued to play and continue to do so now. But that coaching element, that coaching side, has just really grown over the last 10, 12 years that I've been trying to understand what it's all about and try to improve what I do.
So so your whole journey now has taken you, and you've now become a bit more focused in a specific form of football. What led you in that direction?
Yes, so futsal, which I know you've briefly talked about on some of the other podcasts, is very much my life away from personal life and work life. That came through being, I suppose, in the right place at the right time at the University of Bath. So I was playing in the football team there, doing okay. And Graham Dell, who was the first England futsal manager back in 2004, 2003, that sort of period, asked Paul Tisdale, who's the current MK Dons manager, spent a number of years managing Exeter City, was our head coach. And Graham had an idea that he wanted to send a Great Britain university's futsal team to the World Championships, and was asking the sort of, I suppose, the top university football programs, look, have you got anyone who could potentially play this game? And here are some of the attributes that they need to have. And after that, Paul came and asked 3 of us, would you like to go to a World Championship? So there's us looking at each other. Yeah, of course we do. What's the catch? Where is it? Well, it's in Spain. Brilliant. That sounds great. It's 2 weeks. You'll go and represent Great Britain universities, and it's in futsal. And of course, the question we all asked back in 2004 then, what's futsal? We'd never heard of it. He didn't know much about it either. So we went along a little bit blind, and we were in a group of Ukraine, Portugal and France, playing in Spain, huge game in Spain. My first experience is losing 20-0 to a Portuguese team that, interestingly, they won the European Championships last year. Had 3 of those players went on to represent Portugal in that team, and of top players in the world. So no idea. You would think a 20-0 defeat. It's like going back to under 6s, under 7s days. That would turn me off from ever stepping onto a futsal court again. It did the complete opposite. How bizarre that sounds. I just thought, what is going on? Why have I not heard of this sport? All the things that I was seeing in front of me about the game being fast, being a thinking man's game, the tactical nuances of the game, it just gripped me. Fortunately, over the course of the tournament, obviously we didn't progress, but they did a backwards. So they did like a top 8, obviously go quarterfinals, bottom 8 into a play. We did win our last 2 games against other sort of emerging nations. So there was some success from it. And that's how I got into it. That's how I got into the game of futsal. And then a few years later, the National League was set up by the FA in sort of 2007, 2008. I was in my final year at uni, and I set up the futsal part of the Team Bath Football Club, and that's how we kicked off. And that's where I started that slow and gradual transition from football to futsal.
And I guess back then, I mean, it sounds like crazy, doesn't it? That in early 2000s, we were sending kind of a university team as a representative team to go out to sort of thrown together at the last minute to go and represent kind of like GB universities. But firstly, that back then was certainly the nature of university sport, but also is pretty just shows how rapid the rise of futsal has been, because it isn't that long ago, we're only talking 15 odd years ago, that it was pretty unheard of. It was niche, wasn't it? Very sort of little pockets of futsal being played, but really it wasn't that popular. But now, obviously, it's a far more. I still think it's growing, and I still think it's probably not as popular as it could be. But it's definitely a sport in its own right, with like you say, a formal competition structure, a lot more young people participating, and one of those sort of exciting, growing formats of the game, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think back then, what we found in sort of that between that 2004 and that 2008 period, you had the different communities, the diverse country that we live in. You had different pockets, particularly in the urban areas, whether it would be Brazilian communities, Portuguese, Russian, Ukrainian. So there were pockets of futsal being played, but it was usually through those communities than I suppose through English communities. But that's slowly changed. So we owe a great deal to those communities in terms of bringing the sport into the forefront a little bit. And many of them still exist and play a big role within the clubs around the country. And I think that, long may that continue, because it adds real different diversity, a real different skill set, knowledge, understanding, etc. But yeah, now the game is in a completely different place. I suppose what sums that up is the fact that people generally aren't asking that question that I asked 15 years ago: what is futsal? There is a greater awareness and understanding of the game, and the question is moving towards: where can I play? How can I get involved? Where can my son or daughter go and play? And generally speaking, across the country and through the county FAs, there are a number of opportunities popping up all the time. So yeah, it's in a different place, and I think the FA are now really looking at it from some sort of two angles. It is a sport in its own right, but there is an opportunity in which it can support football as well. So yeah, it's getting that balance right between the two, particularly as you have a spectrum, I guess, of futsal enthusiasts really trying to push the sport in its own right, and rightly so. But we've also got to remember our history, our tradition, our culture, and how we can complement the game of football through futsal.
Before we jump into that very subject, I'm just very conscious that there are people out there. We get a broad range of different coaches from different sports listening to the podcast, and I'm conscious we have spoken about futsal before, but for somebody coming in new who has never heard of it, we probably need to talk about what the origination of the sport is and kind of what it actually looks like for somebody who may not have had the pleasure of watching.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. The way I'll give a brief overview of the game, but the way I always sum it up is: think of all the best bits of football and just multiply that by 100, and that's what's going on a futsal court every second of the game. So it's played to a court. It's played indoors on a hard surface. Typically for an adult game, it's a 40 by 20 court, so it's the same as a handball court. The goals are the same size, 2 meters by 3, the same as a handball goals or hockey goals. It is played to 2 lines, as I mentioned, so the ball comes back into play via a kick-in or via corners or via a goal clearance. It's 5 versus 5, 1 goalkeeper, 4 outfield players. Players can go anywhere, and that is a big part of the game in terms of there's a fluidity and a rotation of positions, and players will end up defending 1 second, attacking the next minute. There's a huge number of transitions. There's no head height rule, so aerial passes are absolutely fine. Once the ball's in play, it's very much like a small-sided game of football, but where the difference is the technical application in terms of what the players use to control the ball. They tend to use the sole of the foot because it's a smooth, hard surface. The way in which the ball is manipulated is slightly different because it is slightly smaller and slightly heavier. So the way in which they might pass, the way in which they might use the dud nature of the ball slightly is slightly different. Tactically as well, there's numerous ways in which teams set up, whether that's defending high up the court or defending deep, whether that's attacking with various formations, utilising the goalie in lots of different ways. But I think the way I always talk about it is think of all those exciting moments in football where it's end to end, lots of shots, keeper saving, lots of goal bound opportunities, etc. And it's got a really good discipline behind it. So there's a foul count. So each half, a team's allowed 5 team fouls, direct fouls. If you go over that within a half, it leads to a second penalty or a 10-meter penalty. So yeah, you have the opportunity as a skillful 1v1 player to really exploit that. And similarly, from a defensive point of view, you have to demonstrate your discipline. But yeah, it's I guess my transition led me to futsal because I believe on a small court, small space, less time to make decisions. It really is about a thinking man's game, and some of those physical components that you see in football disappear to some extent. There's still a physical element to it, but you're having to use all your other senses to be successful.
And as I understand it, the origination of the sport itself was. It's derived from the idea of football disallow, football in the room, Sort of the origination in South America, very much that kind of favela street football played in small spaces, and then the codified version, I suppose, that's become like, kind of a worldwide game in its own right. It's interesting, isn't it, how it's on the same dimensions and the same site, basically on the same court as a handball court, because it makes sense, doesn't it, that particularly in Europe where handball is really, really popular, that, and also, the likes of, say, indoor hockey, that actually you're going to play a game of football on a court the same size. And so you would probably adjust the kind of the game and the rules and everything else in order to fit the space that you already have, rather than having to create specific court sizes for a specific format of football that would just cause too much difficulty.
Yeah, so absolutely. So originated in sort of the 1930s, I think Montevideo in Uruguay was where it originated. It's interesting, actually. I've seen in South America and other parts of the world, because it is a global game now, where we would obviously view the court typically as a rectangle shape, if you like, 40 by 20. But I've seen in these, like you mentioned, the favelas or these really dense urban areas, I've seen futsal courts that are a triangle. I've seen futsal courts, and obviously that's not in keeping with the regulated rules of the game, but people are just making space where they can to play these games. And I suppose we talk about within the FA and within the England programs, look, if you're developing the game, you need to have a hard surface because of the attributes you'll gain from that in terms of changing direction, the speed of the ball. You need the goals, you need the type of ball. And I guess they're kind of doing that in their own sense. Yes, when they move into, I suppose, more affiliated futsal, they'll play on a rectangle, but what they're doing is being really creative around the space that they've got. It's definitely a global game now. It's definitely something that, I suppose, with, you mentioned handball there, then those countries around Europe in particular are ready and set up with the sports halls and the facilities that they have to adopt futsal quite quickly. And it is a bit of a challenge, because we know in our country we have different dimensions of sports halls because of the traditions of sports that typically use indoor spaces, whether that be netball, basketball, badminton, etc. But it's not to say that those facilities don't exist. It's just how we coexist with them.
Right. And when I was working in rugby, I was responsible for trying to create some growth of sevens rugby, and one of the things that I found when working with that was, sevens rugby is a fantastically interesting game, because unlike, say, futsal as a small-sided format, they play on the full pitch, which obviously creates some significant challenges in terms of physical capacity and endurance, and the type of athlete required to play seven-a-side rugby or sevens rugby internationally is it's quite an interesting sort of dynamic. It's quite a very, very different type of character. But one of the things I found within the governing body was there was a real range of views about the value and where seven-a-side rugby should fit. There was what you might call the traditionalists, who saw it as a threat to the kind of 15-a-side game. There's the there was the kind of more, I guess, sort of centre ground people that thought, oh yes, this can sit alongside, but it's really there as a development tool for the main 15-a-side game. And then you'd have other people out there who were, pretty much sevens converts, who are saying this is the future of rugby, and actually, pretty soon the 15-a-side game won't be that popular and everybody will be watching sevens. I'm not sure any of those positions are quite accurate, really. But I'd just be interested to know, through your experiences of sort of, like, I guess, living with the growth of a new sport in this country, where you think sort of futsal places itself now as a format, and kind of what its purpose, or how people view it.
Yeah, no, it's probably not too dissimilar. We have that spectrum. So I suppose you've got individuals, you've got clubs that have been set up from day one of the National League, have youth structures behind them that are very much all about the game of futsal and growing the game of futsal, and rightly so. And it's important that we protect those. But as the game grows, it's starting to spill into other parts of the sport, if you like, in terms of football as well. So you're seeing professional clubs adopt futsal programs within their training programs. The Premier League do a number of futsal events throughout the year for the youth age groups. You also have the English Football League Trust have a BTEC program linked to futsal as well, which a number of the professional clubs are involved in. So again, within that professional environment, from the football side of it, they're seeing more of the futsal and thinking, okay, where does this lend itself to player development from a football perspective? And we don't want to stop that. So some of the great examples recently coming through futsal, or being a part of the futsal and the England programs, is at the different age groups we have a number of players that are either a part of academies coming over to futsal and improving the level of futsal, and similarly some of them going back into the professional game. So recently one of the England senior players, Max Kilman, was playing non-league football at Maidenhead. He was also playing in the National League for one of the better teams, and had a few years with the England senior team. He was signed by Wolves Premier League team last year in their under-23s, and recently sat on the bench against Chelsea. So the profile that then provides futsal is really important for the growth of the game. In the England squad that I look after, the under-23s, we recently invited a couple of professional football players from Mansfield Town. Mansfield Town were really adopting the game of futsal, been playing it for a number of years. We invited a couple of their young players, young pros, into the futsal arena. Yes, they may not have played the number of games or experienced the National League as much, but some of the qualities, the physical qualities, the professional qualities, the technical qualities that they're able to bring really enhanced the group. So yes, there's a need to protect the game in its own right. There's a need to work with the existing establishment and these club structures, but I think it's just being aware and appreciation of what other perspectives and angles that we can tap into to really contribute and grow the game. So yeah, it's that balancing act. And from with the England hat on, what can we do to improve our player pool that's coming into the England programs, the domestic league, and ultimately the England team. So it currently sits 47th in the world. The aim over the next 6 years is to move that up the rankings towards 20. So I don't think we can have the blinkers on and think futsal can completely do that on its own. It's going to have a huge role to do that. We do need to be clever and cute and look what are the other opportunities for us to explore.
And so I suppose as it emerges, one of the things that, as from a player pathway perspective, one of the things is almost like there's some emerging routes for particular players, for example, to have almost like an international career. There's the kind of 11-a-side game pathway, but then for others, they may be more suited, technically, tactically, physiologically, to playing the futsal format. I mean, we found that in sevens rugby, where you found that there weren't that many players in the 15-a-side game that were that well suited to sevens. You'd think there would be, but it's actually it's got very different demands, certainly physiologically. So whereas in a 15-a-side rugby, you kind of either have to be a whippet, or you have to be physically dominant, as a specimen, or depending on the positions that you're playing in and whatever. And ideally, what the 15-a-side game tends to look for is somebody who's both ridiculously fast and also physically dominant. I mean, they're the absolute golden eggs in the game, but those athletes tend to be very explosive in the sense of they tend to operate in a they'll run at high speed, but then they'll slow down and break. Then they'll run at high speed, slow down and break. Then they'll run at high speed, and the distances they tend to cover in an initial burst, certainly in the backs, will be it'd be quite considerable distance, but then it would be a kind of a more of an extended recovery time. And then likewise in in the forwards, again, their kind of demands would be very different as well because of the amount of work they have to do in contact areas. But in seven-a-side game, it was more like so we'd say that often that the kind of athlete you needed in the 15-a-side game was either like a long distance runner who can go and go and go and go, tackle, or you needed someone who's a full out sprinter. Whereas in the seven-a-side game, you need somebody with speed endurance. So it's more like being a 200 or 400 meter runner, or sometimes an 800 meter runner. So you've got speed, but you can sustain it over a period of time. Now they only play for like 7 minutes, but a half can last for say 10 with overtime and stuff like that. So in reality, the game can last sort of 20 minutes, and it's constant. So they're covering huge distance, and it's very constant. Whereas now I was thinking in futsal, for example, because the space is a lot smaller. You're looking for a totally different kind of athlete in lots of ways. They have to be extremely agile, extremely adept technically with their control. I know the ball is different and all that sort of stuff. But am I right in thinking that there are some quite significant sort of physiological differences in an ideal futsal player over and above, say, an 11-a-side footballer?
Yeah, and I think from a personal perspective, I'm just glad that we play over a 40x20 and not a full-size court, because I would have been found out long ago. I think, yeah, my abilities would suit that smaller area. The fact that I suppose players do explode over those first few meters, or they have the ability to explode and change direction to find themselves and create themselves space or for others. So, yeah, there's the way in which they, I suppose, move physiologically around the court will look different to the game of football. So there'll be an increased number of smaller sprints over that 5, 10, 15 meters, an increased number of sprints and changing directions and continuing that speed or that tempo. So yeah, there is certainly some physiological differences. There is probably also, when you start, I talk about the transition of players from futsal to football and football to futsal. As our domestic game improves, you'll see the different roles within the team emerge far stronger than they currently do. So one of the things we have at the moment within our player pool, we have a number of good players with a good physiological base, probably a good technical base. Maybe their tactical understanding is somewhere purely just through the experiences that they had that we need to improve on. But over time, as our domestic game improves, you'll start to see a greater position-specific qualities and attributes required for players around the court. So, for example, the physiological requirements of a back player, if you like, or a defender, if you like. They call the Sierra in futsal, almost like the person who initiates attacks will look quite different to, say, those wing players, those 1v1 players, who will be exactly what you said in terms of they will require that speed endurance, they require that ability to change direction. And then again, will look different to that top player, that centre forward or that attacking player that we call the pivot, where actually they perhaps aren't going to be looking for so much space because they're so adept at playing back to goal and using their techniques to roll the ball from side to side to create that space. So that will be a big change in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. But until the quality of our domestic futsal starts to creep higher and higher, we won't see that as much. So we see that within the England team, particularly the senior team. You can start to see the physiological differences even within the group, and that will only continue to emerge over time.
And so you just talked about the kind of tactical understanding bit, which has obviously piqued my interest, this podcast being what it is. And obviously, it'd be interesting just to sort of delve into some of the skill acquisition piece and really begin to, I guess, explore some of how you're applying some of the concepts, because I know you're certainly a devotee, advocate, explorer, let's put it that way, an explorer like I am in the world of, the kind of non-linear constraints-led approach and applying that within the context that you're working in. I mean, it feels to me like a game like futsal would really lend given its roots, given its kind of, I guess, its basis around the idea of a street game almost. It would lend itself to lots of expression, creativity, kind of player connections, all those sorts of things, a lot of novelty. But I'm just interested just to sort of explore really with you kind of how the game is growing and developing in terms of the way you're approaching your coaching and how the team, the kind of the national team group are approaching the sort of development of players from that perspective.
I think we're in a really fortunate position. I think just going back to my experiences of probably a more traditional formal coach education route through football, was hugely valuable in a number of ways. But I always felt going through that pathway that I was needing to be someone else. I was needing to coach in a particular way for somebody else. And what's really been a pleasure with futsal and I suppose being at the start of that growing coaching community, we've had an opportunity to shape a culture which allows that coaching creativity to come through. So in terms of the coach education for futsal, which is linked to the FA, in terms of the England programme, we absolutely, I believe, are following and exploring that games-based approach. I always talk to the young players that I work with. So perhaps say the teenagers, maybe the 17, 18-year-olds, that because that's still sometimes the age at which they first experience it, particularly at a more elite level. That their understanding is probably similar to a 6, 7, 8-year-olds of football. So I'll ask the question: how many of you have seen a full game of futsal? Usually, no hands go up. What they would have seen is highlights on YouTube of some of the best players around the world, like Ricardinho or Falcao, who are, these explosive moments of technique and skill and goals. That's what they've seen. But they've probably not seen a whole game. They've probably not seen a top game live. So their ability to start to piece the puzzle together from a tactical sense, like if you asked an 8 or a 9-year-old, what's the role of a left back in football? They would probably be able to give you some ideas around what their role is in terms of defending, where they may be on the pitch, what do they do when they get the ball. If you asked the same to a 17, 18-year-old regarding what's the role of the pivot in futsal, it would be really interesting to hear the differences in responses. I'd like to think we've now moved on where we'd get a little bit more of a fuller answer, but that's kind of where we are, where we're starting from a coaching place. Appreciate that now there's other clubs and age groups set up, so they are working with younger players, which is great. But that's kind of been a lot of my experiences over the last 10, 15 years. So where's that led to me, I suppose the England programme from a coaching perspective, is that they need that reference. They need to be able to see the game. They need to be able to see the interactions between the players, the interactions between them and their opponents, so they can start to explore and figure out what is going on. What do I need to do and be to I suppose be successful on the court? So from an England perspective and through the age groups that we worked with, yes, there's a huge element of a games-based approach. There's a huge element of allowing the players the opportunity to learn, allowing the players to make mistakes and to discuss, okay, what is going on here? Because similarly, from a coaching perspective, we're still on a journey, and we have to appreciate that they're on court, and particularly our senior team, the current players are experiencing a level of futsal that I suppose the current coaching group didn't experience. So I was fortunate to play international futsal, but even in the last few years since I've played, the game's moved on. So we have to have an appreciation of what the players are experiencing, what the players are feeling, what the feedback they're giving to us, to then go and design sessions to help them to continue to develop, to continue to improve, and ultimately, from that senior point, move up the rankings.
So it feels to me like then you're doing what I always thought every international side should be doing, which is, the technical development's been done elsewhere, right? So you're selecting players predominantly, not always, but predominantly based on what they bring to the party technically, and some of their obviously their tactical capabilities. But and then when you get them into the England program, you're spending an awful lot of your time, I imagine, helping this group to develop their game understanding and their collective understanding in order to be able to allow them to perform effectively on, game day. I mean, it always fascinates me, I have to say, whenever I watch international sides doing, inverted commas training, and I know what we get to see often isn't necessarily what they spend most of their time doing. Most of what their time doing is spent behind closed doors. But I have to say, it still fascinates me that international sides spend as much time as they do on technical repetition, because there's a massive part of me that thinks, A, they must be doing that on a daily basis in their clubs ad infinitum, and B, what really are they going to develop that's different right here, right now in this environment? And wouldn't that time be better spent, given the limited amount of time you have with an international side coming together? Wouldn't that time be better spent in providing enriched game understanding experiences, allowing these players to develop the kinds of connections they're going to need in order to succeed? So it feels to me that that's kind of the way you're operating by necessity. Or am I wrong there? Have I got that completely wrong?
No. I think we worked out. So for my group of the under 23s, if you took sort of the average player, the average contact time within their national league club, which might be training 2 times a week, maybe 3 if you're lucky, plus a game on a Sunday, then you add our camps into that. I think I worked it out that we are 6% of their contact time. 6% of their contact time, depending on the season, depending if you've got UEFA and FIFA competitions, that might increase a little bit more. But yeah, we don't have that time. So from my perspective, with young players between the ages of 19, 21, 22, and preparing them for that senior level, making that step up, we are focusing on that game understanding, that collective understanding, that individual role and responsibility. So look, when you make that transition, there's a good chance you are going to be used in this way. So what does that look like? What does that mean? So it's trying to really hone that tactical understanding, hone those skills that link to that role and position, rather than, like as you said, those basic techniques. Now, what I believe will really push that is as the domestic game improves, as players are dealing with more intense situations, that they can start to come in with increased game understanding, and then we can push them on. We also deal a lot with the number of set pieces in futsal is really high. So the number of opportunities that you get to restart the game from either a corner or a kick-in with the opportunity to shoot is invaluable, particularly as you've got the opportunity to set up a set move which the opposition will have no idea what's coming. We also have the brilliance of the tactic of the fly goalkeeper, or the power play, if you like, that you would see in ice hockey, for example, where we can pull the goalkeeper, put an outfield player in goal who has the same regulations around them as a goalie, but of course can step into the court, can step up the court and play essentially 5 versus 4, if you like, against the defensive team. So there's all these game situations that we have to make them familiar with, comfortable with. The one of the biggest elements, the reason they need to see the game and feel the game and acquire that tactical understanding is the psychology of the game. So you have to feel comfortable within your skin as a player, because if you end up potentially not feeling comfortable and making a mistake, because the court is so small, it can be a goal to the other team. It can really make a big difference. Whereas I suppose in football, if you lose the ball on the right wing quite close to their goal, you've got 80, 90 perhaps yards that you can recover as an individual. But of course, they might have to get through the midfield and the defence. In futsal, that's not sometimes the case. You could lose the possession and they're in through on goal straight away. So yeah, recognising those situations, being able to adapt, being able to I suppose identify good solutions and decision making within the game is absolutely vital.
So this sounds to me like there's an awful lot of similarities with basketball.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the sense that basketball has a lot of those kinds of set pieces as well. You have your foul count and stuff. Interestingly, how rules of games and things like that can change dynamics. For example, so with a foul count and players being able to, I guess, you get essentially a penalty after 5 fouls. That's quite a significant advantage. So you can imagine there's an awful lot of players trying to buy fouls as a big part of the game.
Yes, I suppose one of the why that is exciting and why it works really well is that there's still a fear on the part of the attacking team. If you're playing for that 6th foul, if you like, you're playing 1v1. If you don't get it and essentially the move breaks down, they're through on goal anyway. So it doesn't change. It doesn't change anything. So it's the number of times you'll see teams get to 5 fouls, but they don't get the 6th foul, either because something psychologically is switched, and like you say, they're trying to play for it, so they're not playing comfortably. They're doing something that doesn't quite feel right because they're trying to either force it or buy it, or of course the defensive team's discipline defensively changes. They might drop off from the ball completely, remove all the space behind them and make it really, really difficult for them to break down. So yeah, it still becomes a real tactical battle, almost of the minds of who might give up first or give in first or get frustrated and give the foul away, or the attacking player goes for a move that doesn't work and leads to an opportunity for the other team. So yeah, it's always fascinating. I think where futsal it just lends itself so brilliantly to learning from other sports and sharing with other sports, and it's not that football doesn't, because it absolutely does, and there was a lot that I learned through football. But again, I don't know if it's because the coaching development, the pathway, the coach education support is still relatively new, that there has been a real appreciation of other sports. So when we used to train down at Team Bar Futsal Club, we had the fortunate opportunity to train in facilities with the full size court. We had back in the day, we had England netball training next to us. So we couldn't get the court during the day, so we had to train at 7:30 in the morning. So I would stay and watch England netball. I think the head coach was Sally Gunn, Liz. I can't quite. And I used to just watch how they would defend, how their body positions when they were defending, how they would make themselves big, particularly those centre versus centre battles or the wing attack, wing defence battles. It was really intriguing how they would get pressure on the ball, or they perhaps try and stop the ball at the end point where it was going, so doubling up on maybe the goal attacker or the goal shoot. Similarly, you mentioned basketball, the restarts, the rotations, and probably one of the biggest things that is still underused domestically in our game is screening and blocking. The ability to take a player out of the game by simply blocking them or running across their path to create an overload is huge in basketball, and is probably still underused in England, but is certainly a huge attribute at the bigger game. And I one of the roles that I occupy within the FA is a coach developer sort of mentoring role. And I went to observe a under 11 session. They're on their level 3 futsal course at the moment, and there's a coach support package in place. And I went along, and he introduced it by showing American football. So his topic was around movement. And he introduced it by showing the wide receiver and the different types of movement, and then relating that back to a futsal court, and that wide player, how they might check, how they might run straight and pull away to receive. It was fascinating, and the lads that were watching the sessions bought into it straight away and could see the transference from one sport to another. So I think that's a huge part of the game. And it's a huge opportunity in which to learn from those other sports. And again, just continue to shape practice design that really lends itself to player development.
And so it feels to me like sports like basketball, for example, have this combination of you've got free play, and that's kind of when. So, for example, basketball often has a lot of moves or plays. So you've got your set play, which would be like, when the ball is inbound and they need to get a shot off quickly because the shot clock's, coming down. And then you've got what you might call the kind of a more fluid play, where there is a idea around, or it's what I might call a semi-set play, where as the point guard is bringing the ball down the court, they'll usually be making a signal, and then that means the other players are then going to set various screens in order to get the players into a good position to shoot or whatever it might be. So you've got all of that going on. Then you've got what you might call the more fluid set play, which is whereby there's a general idea of a way in which the team wants to score, but they're prepared to sort of adapt within whatever the defending team is doing in order to create the best opportunity to score. And teams like the San Antonio Spurs and Golden State Warriors tend to operate like that a little bit more. They spend a bit more time in that. So they're a bit less fixed around, we're going to do this move, and that should, if everything goes to plan, mean that we've got somebody free somewhere who's going to be able to score. Golden State tend to operate, I would say, in a slightly different way, whereas there's a kind of a framework of an objective, and there's a framework of activity that the athletes, that the players will do in order to be able to bring about certain scenarios that give better opportunities to score. But it's not fixed in the sense of it still requires the players to adapt to defensive adaptation. And then you've got what I call completely free play. And that's usually what happens in the kind of fast break scenario where, there's absolutely nothing set by that. It's completely adaptation of me with ball, what's my teammate doing, what's the opponent doing, what's the decision I've got to make in the fly to be able to do all that. And it feels to me like, I've watched quite a lot of futsal, and it feels to me like futsal tends to spend most of its time somewhere between that kind of fluid set play and a more fixed type of set play, or at least it seems that way to me, where there's a lot of time where the ball is being passed back and forward whilst the players at the back, the Sierras, as I think you called it, are looking for opportunities for when the players in front of them have made particular movement, or whatever it is, so that they can then be able to play a more incisive ball forward. But always, like it says, with the emphasis on the retention of possession, or it seems to be like retention of possession is very, very key, creating an optimal shooting choice without risking loss of possession, because as you say, that loss of possession resulting in the kind of counter attack is a very dangerous thing and often leads to a goal. So minimizing the risk of counter attack, maximizing the opportunity to create goal scoring opportunities seems to be the order of the day. Or am I wrong there? Have I been watching the wrong kind of futsal?
No. I think depending on the level of futsal you're watching, that I suppose barometer will move up and down. At that highest level, there is just that I suppose tactical understanding that given any situation that they're faced in, that they're able to identify a solution. Now, I suppose what they're able to do at that top level is, through the game understanding, through the concept time that they've had, is execute those moves more successfully more often. So I suppose as we watch it, we naturally go, oh, that's fantastic joined up free play, or that's fantastic maybe kind of set plays within open play, but it's just it comes off more regularly. I suppose as you come back down the levels, the players don't quite have that same ability to understand the situations they are in, or indeed make the relevant decision or action. And I suppose that's our job. How going back to our philosophy around using the game as a teacher a bit, and trying to hone in and focus on certain conditions to really bring up their understanding to enable them to succeed next time. You mentioned those basketball teams, and I'm a big fan of Steph Curry, so he always seems to be a bit of a catalyst within setting up those moves or those opportunities. Yeah. So it's almost as if he is playing a little bit in that guard role, a little bit like a Sierra in essence, and he's so attuned to the defensive shape, the pressure on the ball, the positions in which they're operating in, that he can identify either a solution that they've worked on collectively as a team, or through free play to exploit that. And I suppose that back player in futsal has a lot of responsibility to do something similar. So it could be to initiate some of those set plays within open play. I mean, we're working with 4 outfield players, so you'll often see 4 players come on and 4 players go off. And often coaches will work with sets of 4 in training, because they have the opportunity to really bind that understanding to lead to some kind of tactical action, to maybe so the Portuguese national team have the best 1v1 player in the world, a chap called Ricardinho. They will set up situations purely for him. So the other 3 players will essentially be water carriers, if you like, for certain moments of the game. They will manipulate the ball and the opposition to give him the ball in a particular situation to, like you say, to potentially just go and do that free play. Go and play 1v1. We know you're the best in the world at doing. We absolutely trust you. You're comfortable in that situation. Go and do it. We know how to react off what you do, and that becomes, I suppose, commonplace through the training that they do and the opportunities. But you're right. There will be times where players are looking to set up set plays in open play, and the more times it comes off, we all look at it and we go, "Wow, that's fluid. That's great decision making. That's great intuition," which often it is. But as soon as anything is unsuccessful or break down, we question it. We say it's potentially robotic, and at times it could be, if we haven't helped the players to understand the situations that they're in.
So I'm trying to kind of work out in my mind how you go about preparing players for this very dynamic game with these multi-dimensional components within it. I mean, I've just been thinking as you're talking about like Premiership teams, and it feels to me like Manchester City play a form of 11-a-side futsal, because they don't tend to play the game where possible, I don't think. They're not always trying to play a counter-attacking game. They will, but they're very quick to recognise, or it seems to me anyway, they're very quick to recognise, or at the very least, they place a premium on, like, this is a suboptimal attacking opportunity. The numerical advantage isn't right, or the visual picture doesn't look right. Therefore, what we'll do is we will turn around, we will retain possession, we will then establish dominance, field dominance through our build-up play. Very patient, move the ball around, move the entire block of players further up the field, play further up the field, and then begin a process of, again, I would say it's kind of like semi-structured play, aiming at getting players into certain positions in order to create optimal scoring opportunities. So they very much, it feels to me like they very much play in that way. Whereas, say, if you take, say, Liverpool, Klopp is playing a much more, I would say, or it seems to me anyway, dynamic and chaotic game that actually thrives on actually creating chaotic moments. And he's preparing a team to optimize chaos. to be better in chaos than others. So teams that want to be quite structured and ordered against a team like Liverpool, which is one of the reasons I think particularly they do particularly well in Europe, or it seems anyway, because so many of the sides there want this kind of very slow build-up play. Whereas obviously in the English domestic game, it tends to be a little bit more fast and furious. So obviously, that's kind of well suited. And it was interesting, isn't it, culturally, how so many in the early days of Guardiola's tenure at City, a lot of people were questioning whether you could play Guardiola's style of football in England. It doesn't suit our kind of cultural dimension. Well, he's proven that whole thing wrong. However, I'm thinking to myself, how do you as a coach go about like trying to prepare a team, and what methods and approaches are you using when you've got all those because you've got all that wrapped up into one in a single game, haven't you? You've got moments of chaos, you've got moments of transition, you've got moments of rapid turnover, but at the same time you've got this sort of slower build-up type game. How do you attune players to the dynamics of that?
Yeah, no, I mean the examples you give of the way in which Liverpool and Manchester City play, you're absolutely right. The players, particularly at an elite level, 1 minute could be playing a pressing game because we've identified opportunities in which to go and press the opposition and seen perhaps a tactical frailty within what they're doing. Second minute, we might be dropped right off because they've employed maybe some 1v1 players, or they've employed the goalie as a fly. Other times we might be playing man-to-man marking, which will increase that physiological necessity. Similarly, in attack, we may be playing with a centre forward, if you like, 1 minute. Next minute, we might be playing with no centre forward and operating with a completely different formation. So, first and foremost, in a coaching sense, in a training sense, players have to recognise the flexibility and the fluidity of the game that could happen and adapt very, very, very quickly. So what does that look like in a coaching session? So we've already alluded to the fact that, look, we use a lot of gameplay situation. We try to analyse sort of, okay, what's our game? Where do we want to go to? Where are we right now? What do we need to be to be successful and move forwards? And as a result of that, we will identify a number of tactical needs, technical needs, physiological needs. And I suppose within the games that we then create, start to apply emphasis or as you guys talk through the podcast, put in those conditions or those constraints to really hone in on that learning for that player. One of the things that we started using and I've saw at the Talent Equation podcast live, Danny Newcombe talked about the 3 E's around that: explore, execute, etc. I mean, we definitely try to provide opportunities. Just look, here's the game, here's the focus for the game. We need go and explore it, go and feel what it's about, and try to throw a little bit of ownership to them as players. And get their feedback. Like I said earlier, the game's happening so quickly. As a coach, I'm trying my utmost not to be going, do this, do that, do this, because the game's too quick. They have no opportunity to react in that way. So we empower them. We ask them, look, you need to go and feel this. Go and work this out. Come back to us, and we'll see where they are. And that's hopefully then where the coaches can start to apply some of the tactical understanding that they may have, or the technical reasoning behind that they can go back out there and start to hone that development. But in any training session, we will also have a small period of where we almost put that performance hat on and we go full-blooded, and you need to feel it at that intense level. So we may condition that I suppose, if you like, that learning phase, that opportunity to go and explore, but then they need to go back full-blooded, have a short period of intense opportunities to really experience it, really feed it. And I guess I read a really interesting article by AZ Alkmaar and how they develop their Dutch players within that football team. And they interestingly talked a lot about the players kind of need to feel that little bit of suffering. They kind of need to be really stretched and made to feel uncomfortable. But over a period of time, through thinking it through themselves as players, discussing it with their within the group with their other co-players. That little bit of support, that little bit of hopefully experience or knowledge that the coach can impart or possibly share with them, they will start to feel more comfortable in those different situations. And when it comes back next time round in that intense situation, an intense environment, they do have the tools. Hopefully they've worked some of them out. Maybe we've supported with the development of some of those tools, but they feel in a much better place to then execute, the game plan or the decisions in front of them.
I think that's just for people's benefits who didn't get to see Danny's presentation. By the way, I've actually just uploaded the videos into the website. So if you go into the videos section of my website, you'll be able to see all 4 of the presentations that were given at Talent Equation Live. Yeah, he talked about this triangle, didn't he? So at the top of just to describe it, at the top of the triangle, there's explore. At the bottom left of the triangle, there is exploit, and at the bottom right point of the triangle, there is execute. And he basically was saying, you've got to put a dot in the triangle somewhere when you're doing your practice design to decide what is the practice form that you're choosing at this point in time and why, based on your intent. So for example, if you're in that, one of the questions I got a lot of was what does exploit look like? So let's say you're more on the exploit side of things. So that's where, so if you're in the exploratory realm, the exploratory realm is where there aren't really any fixed ideas necessarily about, and I'm going to take your example, right? So you're tending to work less in the technical domain and more in the kind of tactical game understanding concept. So you would then be asking the players to explore as groups or as a group the opportunities they have to solve a particular tactical problem. Now, once they've done some of that exploratory work, they might then go, right, so we've got a few ideas now. And then you go, okay, so now we're going to move into, we're going to change the constraints of the game so that they're now guided towards exploiting some of these things that they've discovered for themselves or they've explored, and to become more adept at them. And then you might then say, over a period of time, either within the session or over a series of sessions, so it could easily for me be, you've got an exploratory session, an exploitative session, and then an execution session. You could do it that way. Or within a session, you could go, we're going to initially start with exploration, then we're going to become more exploitative, and then we're going to execute. But it doesn't have to work in that linear way either. You could start with execute. Right, execute. Right, what is it you've discovered through trying to execute that you need to work on? Right, let's explore that. Let's exploit it a bit. Let's execute again. So there's lots of different ways of doing this, but it's just important to understand what the differences are and how you might bring about changes of constraints or variability depending on where you are thinking or where the players need to be in order to become, more able to perform whatever action it is that you're trying to design.
And I think what through that, that journey or process, wherever you start, one of the things that we're really keen to encourage is, okay, as a group, you might have gone through that exploratory phase, if you like, come up with a few ideas and thoughts. Rather than the coach coming back and challenging them, which we can do at times through a bit of questioning, etc. I really want them to challenge each other. So I really want them to. I think we have a number of futsal players that can tell us some nice stuff about the game. So they'll tell us, look, here's some formations. Here's how we might get into those formations. Tell me the why. Why are we doing this? And I want them to do that with each other. So every time they're in that situation, they can start to really understand what's going on around them, and again piece that puzzle. So I think for me through that journey, sometimes that might be the coach initiating some of that, but I want to get to a point where they are challenging each other. They are collectively coming up with the way forward. To hopefully get to a better point in time.
And that's for me is like and you're constantly flowing, aren't you? You're constantly tweaking and adjusting in order to get them to the point that you want to get them to.
Yeah, absolutely, and always battling with myself on the approach that I take. I honestly believe it's probably a bad thing to say. I often think to myself, have I actually delivered that many good coaching sessions in my time? I always challenge with myself when I step back and come away from it. Have I allowed a really productive environment for them to own as much of the learning as possible, to allow them to see that progression? And I think there has to be an appreciation by using the games-based approach, by allowing them to explore, about giving them the time and the opportunity, is that you're going to see fluctuations. And I think that's when you said over a series of sessions, that's really important, that you can't expect to focus on one tactical action or one tactical problem, and for a games-based approach, see that solution immediately emerge at the end of it. You have to go through that tweaking, that refining, that adjustments in the approach, giving them a little bit more of the slack, maybe taking a little bit away through the conditions or the constraints that you set. And over a period of time, what I'm now seeing is those light bulbs coming on. And then when it comes into the gameplays, into time.
So, now that's interesting. You just said that over a period of time, you see the light bulbs coming on. Now, I think you've just stumbled on something that I think a lot of people, in my opinion, need to hear. So here you are working at national level with a group of elite athletes, and you are questioning, how many good coaching sessions have I done? But actually, I think that is central to the life of the coach, and it's central to the coaching experience, and it's something that more of us need to become more comfortable with. And I do think this is a failure of coach education, because in my view, if you don't come away from a session with those questions in your mind, then in my mind, I don't think you have done the right session. Because unless you're constantly tuned into, well, how can I get this better? How can I enrich this? How can I make this more vibrant? How can I make the information sources become more focused and intense? How can I kind of laser beam the information sources so that these players are picking up and attuning to these things? Unless you're thinking of all those sorts of things, if you come away from a session thinking, that was brilliant, if you come away to think, oh God, it was, everything worked, it was fluid, everybody kind of came away and everyone's got smiling faces and we've achieved something, that for me is fool's gold. That's where you get sucked into this world of assuming that because a session ran well, because it was well organized, because you could see a demonstrable learning outcome in front of your eyes, that's not true learning. You've been seduced by this fickle mistress that is suggesting to you that you have done your job because you've seen, I've done this and now I can see that. The likelihood is, if you see something happen in our game, in the dynamics of a game like futsal, right? If you can see something happen in the space of, say, an hour and a half, and you see that, the likelihood of that being retained long term is very, very limited. And you get seduced by the fact that you can see it in front of your eyes. And that's one of the reasons why I think people are so kind of bought into, if I work sequentially in a linear way, I will get this kind of outcome. I feel that actually one of the things that I've had to get used to is a sense of slight dissatisfaction on the quality of the experience that I've provided. And because there's always that question, isn't there, of, oh, but I could have maybe, and oh yes, that could have, what if I'd have, and all those sorts of things. And that is an experience that you become more adjusted to and aware of, and you become better at understanding. But that sense of that wasn't quite good enough you have to get used to that idea. And actually, the minute you lose that, I actually think you've got to ask yourself some difficult questions.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think as you where I'm now, I suppose, coaching and delivering a lot of my futsal sessions, I am absolutely aware that the players who are striving to make that transition into the senior team are thinking, what am I learning? How am I developing? Can I see it for myself? And can I see that pathway progression to make that step up? So I think one of the things I've certainly started to do is to find more opportunities. I suppose I have the luxury that, we come together for a whole day. So we'll have a couple of training sessions in that day. We'll have theory sessions. We'll have opportunities to talk with the players. So I will find time to talk to players about the session, either during the session, before or after, and start to hopefully help them to understand why we're doing what we're doing from them on an individual perspective. I did a session for under 14s, under 15s last week in Upminster in I think that's Kent or Essex. And I asked at the end of the session to the players, look, first of all, buddy up with someone on the opposition and give them a really positive point about what they did well tonight. But I said, then as a pair, can you come back and think of one thing that I, as a coach, could potentially improve on to help with your learning? And that was really interesting, because I suppose I knew I wasn't going to get flooded with answers, because it's not the typical question that they've been asked. But 2 or 3 of the pairs did come back and provide me with some feedback, which was absolutely fantastic. So the more I can start to get that feedback, although I may feel slightly dissatisfied, I've now got an opportunity to build upon that next time with direct feedback from the players that I'm working with. So yeah, I suppose I'm really trying to encourage with my support team around us. Look, we need to unpick and understand this learning journey that these players are going through. How do they feel, and how can we support that moving forward?
That's an important point, I think, from a coach development perspective. I mean, we often can have peer support from the coaches that we're coaching with. We might have, if we're fortunate to have somebody observing us, we'll have a coach developer who might be able to give us some views, but that's still very coach centered. It's coaches talking to coaches about what they're doing as coaches. Now, if you can triangulate that with participant experience information, however subjective that might be, then you can begin, I think, then to start to form a picture. So you've got your own reflection, the reflections of others, or the observations of others, combined with the feedback from the athletes. And then you've got probably then something in the middle that tells you something about the way you can improve and develop as a coach.
And I think the athletes, depending on the ages, and even with the younger ones, look, they give you a starting point for a conversation that then you could take to your assistant coach, or, like you say, if you're fortunate to have a coach developer or a mentor. So it might be something as simple. Look, we felt we could have played the game in its entirety more, or look, we would have liked to have played the full game for longer. Okay, that's all you need. You can either choose to continue that conversation with the player if you feel it's valuable to do so, or, like you said, you can go take that initial conversation starter and see where it leads you with the discussions that you may have with yourself or with a coach developer, for example.
Fascinating. Now, I know you've got to be able to jump on a train to get on down to our office to go meet with some colleagues, and that's a conversation the work we do on a daily basis in the wonderful world of coach development and coach education is something we can talk about on a podcast another time, or even on another podcast, never mind, for that matter. But listen, really valued your time and your insights. It's an area that it's a game I find really interesting, really fascinating, and the journey you're on and the work that you're doing in the both in the England space and also in that community space is really interesting. How do people track you down if they want to ask you any questions or get some more insights from you around the work that you do?
Yeah, no, I absolutely call out to people if they're interested in what they can find me on Twitter at KitSean, Kitsion. They will be able to, I often post things around futsal or around coaching, often sharing the work of yourself and those that come on the podcast. So if they're interested around futsal or some of the coaching conversation that we had today, that's where they can get hold of me. And yeah, keen to although yes, working in that national space, like I said earlier, I think there's a real opportunity. We call it the futsal family a little bit in terms of that growing coaching network. Really, really comfortable and happy to support that moving forwards.
Awesome. Sean, thank you very much. We'll see each other later for a meeting that we've got.
Indeed.
But in the meantime, like I said, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you sharing your insights. We don't get enough opportunities actually just to talk about this kind of thing because we're so busy racing around the country trying to do what we're trying to do for the rest of the world. But yeah, all the best, and look forward to chatting with you again another time on the podcast.
Thanks, Stuart. It's been a pleasure. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. Great conversation with my compatriot Sean there. He's doing some fantastic work out there with a new and emerging and exciting format of the game. Fantastic stuff. Conclave, it's open. Got some spaces available. So if you want to join me on the learning journey with this fabulous little community of coaches who have committed to come together on a regular basis and to help each other solve each other's problems and to learn a few things from sporadic guests that I get to come along to they can do a private Q&A with. If you want to join, head over to the website, look at the Patreon button, click on there, and you'll see there's a couple of conclave options. Join, welcome, be great to have you on board. We're meeting on the first Monday of every month. We do so online, and I'm also exploring the opportunity of maybe doing a breakfast session so that some people in other parts of the world find it more easy to join. So if you're interested in doing that, it'd be great to have you on board. In the meantime, have a great week of coaching, and remember, ditch those drills.